Khe, I just want to start by thanking you first and foremost for kind of making the time to chat with us.
Thank you, Stu, and thank you all for taking the time to hang. I'm excited for this conversation. I love this topic.
I think your story, Khe, is really kind of inspiring, and I'm really excited for the folks who maybe don't know it to hear more about it. But we're going to kind of have a conversation around what we more or less have deemed the inner game of writing, the inner game of kind of creating, and really like all of the barriers that are not necessarily external that you face when you're kind of creating as a either as an online entrepreneur, as an online writer. We're going to touch on Khe's background, and then we'll definitely leave some time at the end for Q&A. I guess we're going to get into your full story, but I actually just wanted to start maybe at the truly very, very beginning, which is that your parents, I think, immigrated to the United States. And maybe that's all I'll say for now, but I'm curious what you learned about work and your career from them.
Oh man, we're gonna need more than an hour for that one. But so I'm the child of first generation Cambodian immigrants. My parents came to New York with no friends, $500, barely speaking English in the early 70s, and I was born in 1979. But there's a whole lot in how that has shaped my life to this minute. Mostly positive, a lot questionable, and some negative. But I would say, to wrap it all in kind of one, I'll wrap it up with two stories. Mostly, my dad's a very dominant personality, and so the first one would be my dad would always say, "We may not be the smartest, but we're the hardest working," which I don't know if I would repeat that mantra to my own kids, but hey, that's how I grew up. That was the mantra ingrained into my memory, into my head. And then the second one was, why would I ever go hiking? I only walk to places where I need to get to. And so I think in a nutshell, that captures a lot of the underlying values that, my hardworking, assiduous Asian parents instilled in me. And so to set the stage for that, they basically put me on the track. They invested heavily, dollars, time, love, in creating as many opportunities for me as possible. That landed me at Yale, that landed me at Wall Street. And, I was on the escalator. I was on the 15-year escalator of Wall Street, doing quite well there. I was in a role where I would never have to worry about money ever again if I just showed up and didn't screw up. And I quit with no plan at the age of 35 with a 1-year-old and a wife who is a struggling artist, struggling to sell her work artist. And that was 6 years ago. Ask me anything.
Yeah, I know. This is like, there's so much of this onion to peel. And I'm like, God, there's no way we'll cover it all in an hour.
I'll come back.
Yeah, yeah,
If
totally.
I'm voted back onto the island, I'll come back.
Yeah, this is really a 4-part series. This is the introductory call. Yeah, I actually, because you've been really open and you have shared your full Wall Street story, it's out there for people to read, and I'll send it out to folks on the call. But I did figure like maybe you can just give us the 1-minute story about your career on Wall Street, just kind of the brief of what happened there. And then I definitely want to get into some of those tipping points that led you to kind of your next journey.
Yeah. So the TLDR in the Wall Street career was I was an insecure, shy, skinny kid who was not really part of the who was not part of the in group, but was quirkily smart. And I said, I'm going to use my intellect and that work ethic that my dad instilled on me to acquire success and power and status through the sheer brute force of my effort. And it kind of worked. However, that approach, and that worked, meaning I got many promotions, I managed teams, I worked my butt off, I was very strategic in how I approached work, how I approached relationships. But I think what the more interesting part of that all was that there was something inside of me that was unsettled. And if I reflect on it now, I guess I have two very deep existential fears. I have a deep fear of not being loved, and I have a deep fear of my irrelevance once, my ashes are in the ground. I'm not religious. And so many of my behaviors can be attributed to those two very, very deep human, probably relatable to some of you, desires, which I didn't realize. That's the thing, is I didn't realize them until probably in the past like 5 or 6 years, right? When you're busting your ass on Wall Street, working 12, 14 hours a day, you don't even barely sleeping, you don't have the mind space to think about that. Instead, what you do is you numb yourself with more work, you numb yourself, try to get more promotions, you numb yourself with alcohol. And so I think that a lot of that kind of tipping point was what my coach calls the pebble in my shoe, like something was off, and giving myself permission to explore it, and then like just rolling with the fucking punches and seeing where it took me, and where it continues to take me.
Yeah, and like I said, I the story is so amazing that I'm like tempted to spend all of our time there. But I am really curious, when you maybe just briefly, what ultimately led you to the decision to turn away from it? Because I think what's particularly interesting about a career on Wall Street is obviously like you're not exactly walking away from a dead end job that you hate. I mean, you may have reached a point where you didn't like it, but it's certainly it's the opposite of a dead end job. It truly was only up from there. So what ultimately kind of gave you maybe the courage or the, almost the breaking point to make that change?
I mean, I think part of it was having a child. And I think in that message was, in staying was a message, an implicit message to my child. I have two now, was that it's okay to be mentally checked out to do something for money. And I was 35 years old. Like, I mean, hopefully like multiple lifetimes ahead of me. Like, it felt so sad to just accept that as like the rest of my life, and then just show my kids that was it, that was like the rest of their lives. So it was just like setting a bad role model. And people always ask me, like, I mean, I walked away from, like I said, I never would have to worry about money for the rest of my life. And now I like get excited when I get a $250 check. So people are like, that's so risky. That's so risky. I was like, you know what's riskier? What's riskier is spending 35 years in a job that you don't get excited to show up for every single day. And I was like, when I framed it that way, I'm like, what's the risk? Like, I can't go back and get that exact job, but like, I didn't leave on bad terms. People respect that I was doing something different. I didn't go to a competitor. I didn't do anything shady. I didn't burn a single bridge. I never talk shit about the finance. Sorry, I curse a decent amount. I never talk shit about the finance industry in my posts. I like have little jabs at them, but like, I don't really like badmouth it because I don't think it's a bad industry. It just wasn't for me.
I love that. And I think, yeah, it's like the opportunity cost is almost this real risk. And one thing I'm like super curious about, given that from the outside, it maybe could feel like a 180. How did you end up writing, and how did kind of blogging and starting a newsletter start to maybe look like the next
Yeah.
option?
So the whole process was and continues to be really accidental. And we could talk about like the way I monetize my business now, which is mostly through teaching a course about Notion, right? Like that Notion only really came into the foreground 2 years ago, right? I left 6 years ago. So, but one thing I will say is that one of my guiding principles has been and will continue to be follow the fun, make work feel like play. And so everything that I do, like if it might sound indulgent and irresponsible, but I actually think it's my secret superpower, is like, if it's not fun, I don't do it. And maybe that's cost me money. That has cost me money in the near term, because like a really annoying client who's going to suck and that's offering to pay 3x the rate, I'll say no. Because it's not fun. I want to wake up and feel like it's fun. And if it takes me longer to get, I don't even have like, as long as I can pay my bills and support my family, and like, and surf every day, like that's all I want. So it's not like I need this big pot at the end. So I would say that's the overarching principle. It's just be guided by fun. If it makes you light up, keep doing it. And so how did that start a newsletter? Honestly, I was still on Wall Street, and I was on vacation, and I call it a Twitter arbitrage, because all of like my friends don't use the internet like the way we do. They think this is weird, and stuck up, stuffy Wall Street folks. And so I was on vacation and I just saw these cool articles. It was like article from Keith Rabois on like how to become an effective executive, something from Adam Grant, another thing of like Elon Musk first principle thinking. And I just like put it in a Gmail, 36 people on BCC. And I was like, hey, I found these 5 articles really interesting. What do you think? And people were like, this is fucking awesome. When are you doing the next one? And I mean, this was way before Substack. This was before like everyone had a podcast, before everyone had a newsletter. And so we could talk about like, how would you differentiate yourself today? But I just did that. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to read this stuff anyway. It was actually fun to like blurb them because it made me like really crystallize my thoughts. And it was just this little like thing where like I was adding value to other people's lives. Like I really didn't have any expectation of anything, right? It was just like, hey, I think this is cool. I think you might think it's cool too. End of story. And so that started 36 people on a Gmail BCC, and that was 6 years ago. I think this Sunday, I'm taking a break this week. I took a 3-week vacation, but we should talk about burnout too. But on the next week will be, I think, the 289th issue. And I've added like 3 newsletters since. So I write 2 to 3 newsletters a week now.
Yeah, one thing you said on, I think it was Patrick O'Shaughnessy's podcast, was you had started off your newsletter with kind of this curation approach. It's very curation heavy. And I think you put it very bluntly, which was more or less like, I found myself kind of almost hiding behind curation and sharing other people's thoughts instead of really maybe expressing or articulating them myself. But yeah, I did some digging. So I'm curious to hear you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that experience of like really feeling maybe more comfortable stepping into.
Well, I think the thing you got to remember too is that I was a CS major. I analyzed quantitative hedge funds on Wall Street. And for a 10-year stretch, I didn't read fiction because I thought it was a waste of time as I was building up like my like I was reading books on option theory and like statistics and whatever. So I'm not a writer. And so let this be hopefully a permission to all of you that like I did not go to J school. I did not have an English major. I did not grow up speaking English. And I guess I'm a writer now. So that would be I'm just giving you all permission that like the label of writer is not always something that you identify with out of the gates. I still struggle to identify with that label. In terms of your specific questions too, yeah, so it was just legging into a medium that it was my way of learning writing, right? It's much easier to summarize an article. I think Dave Perel talks about this in his course. Like it's much easier to summarize an article than to write your own. But what I realized was that there was this like beast clawing. It's like, let me out. And you know what? We talked about this like deep desire that I feel to like be loved and accepted by people. It was much easier to say like, hey, here's an article from Stu. And Stu says that once you have this level of success, you might be unhappy. I can relate to that. It's much easier to say that than to say, I had this amount of success. This happened to me and I was unhappy. Like there's like it's putting yourself out there. And so eventually probably, it was like week 80, maybe week 100, I ripped it off and I kept the 5 links and then I added a personal essay on top.
This resonates on a profound level because this is going to maybe sound trivial, but I'm actually really curious because I think other people on the call might resonate with this experience. Is that it is really, I at least have had this experience of experiencing a lot of fear when I'm really kind of making a statement where it's like, I am expressing a thought that I truly believe. I'm not hiding behind a quote or a passage from somebody else. And in this specific case, I saw a tweet about this really elaborate, like how I choose what books to read process. I had this kind of violent reaction where I was like, it's not fucking hard to like pick what book to read. Like just, you can skim it for 2 minutes and you'll know if it sucks. But I had all this like internal struggle publishing that opinion because a lot of people do have systems. There's a lot of engagement. So I'm curious if this is a battle that you felt as you've started to skew more towards, original creation, if you will.
Yeah. I tend to not jump into conflict. Like I'm not a very confrontational person. And so if people want to like, lose their shit about whether Rome's better than Notion or, Evernote, like I don't give a fuck. Notion works for me and I'll tell you why. If I've tried the other things, I'll tell you why they didn't work. I'll play up their strengths. I'll tell you their disadvantages and I'll tie it back to my story. right? And my story is not that Rome sucks. I think Rome's very cool, but it's just that it didn't work. It's too much for me. It's like driving a Ferrari to the supermarket. Like I could just take the Civic. So I will always, like, I don't try to stoke confrontation. In fact, and I know that you can like take Tiago's Twitter feed. Like he looks for confrontation, right? And again, I'm not criticizing it. He's actually one of my mentors, but just this is not me. And I couldn't. I get really bothered when there's like one troll, and so like it wouldn't even work for me. So I'm nice. I like elevate other voices. I block quickly. I don't like get into the controversial fray, and I always bring it back to my story because that's where I can speak honestly, which is like, look, for me, Notion worked great and Rome didn't. So I don't have as much of that. I think though the challenge with this approach is that at over 6 years, it gets kind of tiring to write about yourself. Like not much has happened in my life between 2020 and 2021 that like can continue to provide this fodder. And to be honest, I'm just kind of sick of writing about myself. And so now it's kind of like shifting me into more of like a journalistic approach. It's like, who the fuck cares what Khe has to say? Like, I want to hear what this person has to say and this person, and bring me the collective opinions. And your role becomes, again, writing. You're the writer, but you're like you're a curator of ideas, and you'll sprinkle your theme into it versus it being all about you.
I love that. Well said. I think it's almost like you're finding some signal amongst the sea of opinion and noise. You're strewing together a story to help other people connect to it. And it doesn't necessarily always need to be, about you or your story, et cetera. One thing you've also talked about that I thought was really interesting is like specifically maybe with like solopreneurship, but I think that maybe this also applies to like building an audience and putting your work out there, is that I think you used a metaphor from like investing where the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. If you recall, I'm curious to hear how you apply that to the own kind of long game of building your presence online.
Let me start with a story. So the teenage nerd in me, one of the things that I was good at men's gymnastics, Magic the Gathering, HTML, and investing. And so I bought my first shares of the S&P 500, I believe when I was 17 years old, when I sold my Magic the Gathering collection. I had like all the dual lands. I think they're worth like $50,000 now. I sold them for like 7,000, which was a lot, 1997 as a 17-year-old. Anyway, I bought my first purchase of the S&P 500 then, so I was 17, and continued then every month to invest this some amount of money to today still. Here's something crazy. So that was 1997. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, I looked at the balance. And I just looked at all dollars in over an 11-year period. And granted, there were small dollars in 1997 and relatively bigger ones in 2007 because of my career. And the balance was negative, i.e. the value of the account was lower than the dollars that I had put in aggregate over 11 years. So why do I bring up that story? Because I didn't do anything. I just stick with the plan. And I think over the 3 ensuing years, that balance went up by like 300 times. And so like the return over the 13-year period was like 16%. So the problem with that is that in a financial crisis, when people were like, I invested for 11 years and I lost money, you're compulsed to make the wrong decision. And the wrong decision is like, this doesn't work. And so I always think, and so there's that famous Keynes quote that says markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. I kind of adapt that to so many parts of my creative life and just like how people perceive you, right? Like the day that I left Wall Street, people are like, you're fucking nuts. You're putting your life, your family in danger. Some old mentor of mine even told a friend, he's like, watch, I've seen this story before. His wife's going to leave him. Like that's the kind of stuff people were saying about me when I left. And then I get a CNN profile 3 years later and they're like, dude, you're killing it. And then I'm like, in my head, I'm like, okay, I got 3,000 new subscribers from that article. I have still not made a penny doing this, right? So the whole reason why I brought up that analogy is just like all this stuff's happening outside, weird stuff. Like I remember feeling really triggered when like this young analyst that I hired out of college, like went out and bought herself a Range Rover. I was like, how did you do that? Like, what? She'd worked for me for 10 years. So like she was a range worthy, like Range Rover caliber salary. But I was like insecure about it because of the path that I chose, like I couldn't get a Range Rover. And more importantly, I don't want a Range Rover. I don't like cars. I like surfboards. So again, all these things can happen to you where, you know, a lot of good things will happen, but a lot of you only remember the bad ones. And those are the ones that threaten you, like that moment when I was looking at 11 years of investing and you're just like, fuck this, I'm out. Right. And the longer you can extend that window, the more, if you have half a brain, the longer you can extend that window, the longer you can expand the map of success and the possibilities of success and the compounding behavior of the thing that you did yesterday.
God, I love that. And this is a perfect segue into, I just want to quickly ask about kind of like the business that you run now and really like what you figured out as kind of a business model and some of the things that you sell that really kind of work. And it's been a long journey getting there, but then I'll rewind a bit and hear the process behind it. But I am curious kind of now that you're a few years in, what kind of business models you've really found success with, the things that really are now starting to maybe compound for you.
Yeah.
And we'll unpack it from there, but.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm sure you saw that viral tweet where someone was like, I don't know why people are trying to build $1 million companies. All they should do is find a job that pays them $250K or find an activity that pays them $250K a year and takes them, 3 hours a day to maintain and call it a life. I was like, oh, okay, sure, buddy. And so just for context, like it took me 6 years to get to 250,000 in top line revenue. I hire a lot of contractors, so that's not profit. And I work way more than 3 hours a day, probably like six, seven, but very, very productive hours a week. And so if you step back, one thing that I think is very important for me to tell when I share my story about like my finances is that I entered the land of creatorship with a healthy amount of savings from my Wall Street career. So to put that in very specific terms, I had 18 months to 2 years of living expenses where I could make zero and we would be completely fine. So that is not, from my understanding, that is not the typical starting point of a creator. That being said, I had a family of 4 then, and paying for your own health insurance, like all that stuff. But anyway, I do want to disclaim that because I had a long runway where I didn't have to focus on making money, and I used it, right? That's why I could say things like only do things that are fun. When you don't need to make money, it's much easier to do that, right? Like you could say no to a client, an asshole client, when you don't need that money. But to zoom that out, so I had given myself kind of 2 years of runway to figure this out. And the reality is what happened is that through my writing, just like random opportunities would find me to make money. The first one was coaching. Very quickly, coaching, life coaching specifically, got on my radar, and people were like, you're figuring something out about life and we're watching it in real time. Can we pay you to help us? And so from that started a small per hour coaching business that started to defray that cost. And by the way, what happens when you start bringing some money, that 18-month runway turns into 36 months, right? Because you're pushing things out a little bit more. You assumed zero, but here, you might be making, 30% of what you thought you were going to make. So it started with coaching, and then it morphed into it added like a little bit of public speaking, especially after the CNN article. And then there was like a little bit of corporate consulting, which I never really got into because I didn't really know how to position myself as a corporate consultant. But those were the activities that were starting to be like, oh, if I wanted to be a full-time coach, I could make a full-time living doing this. Like I was like, I'm safe. I don't have to go back. Like my whole thing is like, I don't want to go back. I was ready to if I had to, but I didn't want to. So coaching made me realize like, oh, like I could do this. But at the same time, the great thing about having this newsletter is like I had this canvas where like I could try like different stuff out. I could put a little postscript at the bottom that's like, hey, one coaching slot opened up. Shoot me an email if you want to talk about it. And just like that, you know, when you have 5,000 people at the time on your email list, like that could turn into 10 new clients, 5 new clients. So I was always tinkering with all of those things. I realized quite early that I was never going to be the high volume guy. My lists aren't that big. My email list is like 25,000 people. My blog gets about 50,000 uniques a month, but that's really brand new. Like that's all just Notion related. Like my original non-Notion writing gets actually very little traffic outside of people who find it on Twitter. So like I'm not a high volume guy, like high traffic guy, because I try to write more quirky. I don't want everyone to like me. And I don't want to water it down to a place that you could have just like mass adoption. My old mentor and editor, he's like, you're like a craft beer. It's like the people that love you just like are so passionate about you, but you're never going to have the sales of Budweiser. I'm like, yes, that's exactly the place that I want to be. Like, by the way, Budweiser buys tons of craft beer businesses over the years. So it went from like coaching, consulting, and a little bit of speaking. Again, like trading time for money, what I call $1,000 work, right? Which is like high skill, but low leverage. And then about 2 years ago, and again, I can't reiterate the importance of having an audience where it's like, hey, I've been playing around with this tool called Notion. I think it's really cool. Like, and then all of a sudden people are like, I never heard of this. This sounds cool. Khe says it's cool. Like we're watching him do this cool stuff. He's making these Loom videos on Twitter, like blah, blah, blah. So having that canvas lets you try different things. A lot of them fall flat. Like I tried to do, one Instagram story every day for half a year. Like I'm not good at that. That's not me. So, but making Loom videos about Notion, like that's like right up my fucking sweet spot. People dig that. And so what happened was that, and I was kind of, what happened was basically people came to me and they're like, can you teach me how to use Notion? This was about 2 years ago. They're like, we're seeing all the cool stuff you're doing. And like, we can't, it's like a blank canvas when we open the app. And so at that point, I had kind of figured out how to use Zoom and how to bring people together and how to price things and how to write a sales page and how to manage an email funnel. We could talk about all the ops that support all this. But I knew just enough to be like, throw up a landing page, get some people in, host some Zoom calls, and people really loved it. And so from that turned into, we did 5 cohorts of that. I think it's cleared over like 250 grand of revenue. I mean, most of my revenue comes from those courses now. But who knows, right? Like Notion, there's been a dip in the Notion sales. And what's happened, again, it's evolved, is that people have come to me and they're like, okay, Notion was cool, but what's really more interesting is how you synthesize this life philosophy of yours. How do you bring together habits? How do you bring together goals? How do you bring together values? How do you bring together relationships? And like, the truth is like, I don't really know. It's just like this amalgamation of my life over, my adult life. But as a writer now, I can start to like break that down into different systems and frameworks and so on. So that's where I see the class evolving, where it's actually going to be much more about, I always say like one of my big heroes is David Allen, GTD, right? It's like a system that it's tool agnostic. It's quite simple, but it's actually very, very layered and nuanced. GTD is like, but that's just tasks. That's just like this little one part of your life. And it was written in a world before the internet, really, 2003. So it doesn't really like suit the lives that we want to live today. Again, there's no knock on David Allen. He charges $150,000 a year for one-on-one coaching. So like he's dialed in. But so my point, Stu, is that it's going to evolve. And if we're sitting here having this conversation in 2 years, it's going to look very different than it did today. And I'll be damn proud of that, because for me, one of the markers of success is not doing the same thing over and over again. Like I need novelty. I need adventure. I need a change of scenery. I need to flex different intellectual, technological muscles. And so by design, and again, I think that maybe I'm like putting down, like sacrificing some profits. If I said like, I'm going to be the number one destination for everything Notion, like I bet I could make more near-term money than I am this like cobbled craft, caveman approach. But that wouldn't sustain me. I cannot see myself being like the house of Notion in even for 2 years. Like I think I'm just not interested enough in it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I just find really exciting and inspiring by your story, which is like the willingness to just follow your interests kind of in a forward-looking way, not in
Mhm.
I think thank God you didn't take the advice of your coworkers, 6 years ago. And I think so much of I recently made a big transition myself, and so much of the advice you hear is like keep compounding on the things you're already good at.
Mhm.
Kind of what I hear you saying is, basically the moment that it's not really fun, it's like you maybe need to start thinking about the next thing and the next
Yeah.
place to explore.
And
And
there's a tension there because there's a tension of like, you're doing that at the expense of near-term profitability. Right. And so you got to be honest about that tension. And you got to be honest about like why you're doing what you're going to do. Like one thing that's really like, it's very easy to do what I'm doing because I came from a very lucrative line of work. It's also very easy to do what I'm doing because I don't want to retire. If I keep having fun, you're going to have to carry me off of this desk. So I don't need to save in my IRA. Like you're sure, like I will make smart investing decisions, but I don't want to retire. Your life financially becomes a lot easier when you say, I don't like to retire because the things I do every day for work are fun.
wow, that is like a profound point that I think just completely blew my mind, which is like, yeah, so much of the planning for retirement advice is the underlying principle is you want to stop working and like bag as much as you can because good gods, you can go hang out on a beach, when you're 80 years old and can't even wheel yourself down. So I
Well,
love the framing of
I
like,
surfed 2 hours before this call today.
yeah. I know. And this is, the time horizon is much longer. Jen just put in the chat, which is so true. And so I do want to leave. I'm going to leave the last maybe like 15 minutes for Q&A, 15, 20 minutes for Q&A. But I did want to ask a couple more questions about almost like your kind of a personal evolution as you've continued on this journey. And more specifically, something I'm really curious, you now having done this for, 5 or 6 years now, is like, what are maybe some of the most common challenges or friction points that maybe early on you ran into, maybe that are still persistent today? Yeah, I love that you're transparent about the fact that you had some money saved up and you could take some risks that maybe some other folks couldn't. But what are some of maybe those consistent walls that you've had to break through on this
Yeah.
journey, really figuring
Ooh.
this out?
I think that I don't know when I broke it, but I for I think one of the luckiest things was I am a perfectionist in many elements of my life, but when it comes to writing, I'll just ship. And so I'm like happy to do something that I don't love and just put it out there and like watch the feedback loops of it. And I think that a lot of that is dealing with your ego, right? Like, there's a part, the reason why people are hesitant to ship so frequently can be two things. Is like they're perfectionists. And so they rather have one great piece than like a lot of like, one home run versus like 50 singles, or they're afraid of judgment or slash imposter syndrome, or one of those kind of self-limiting beliefs. And so I think that I kind of creeped forward with the latter one, like the judgment part, like what, like case sucks as a writer or all that. I think I was able to do that through a lot of coaching on my own and really like disassociating. Like, if you don't like my writing, it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I mean, I know that sounds like so quaint and obvious, but it's really hard to separate the emotion of the identity that comes with it. Especially, a lot of you have full-time jobs still. So like I didn't have an identity. Like my identity was that of an aspiring writer. And so if I suck at the one identity I have left, like that can hurt. And so it took a lot of coaching to like let go of that. The other thing with shipping it quickly, and I think I just realized there was a few things I realized, like there are a few advantages that I found with shipping quickly. And what is shipping quickly, I mean, is like just trying to put things out publicly as frequently as possible, 2-3 times a week. A few things with shipping quickly. One is you can hit the zeitgeist really quickly. So like if like the week everyone's talking about Soul, the movie, Like there's no need to like create a Rome document, grab the quotes, like Like by the time you do all that shit, no one's talking about soul anymore. Just write the post the next morning. Sit down for 25 minutes, give yourself a limit. So that'd be one thing. You could hit the zeitgeist really quickly. It's really, really important as a writer to always, even if you're writing about something totally different, if you can peg what you're writing about to the thing people are talking about, the Queen's Gambit, the Tesla, cyber truck, whatever, people are more compelled to read it. It's just more interesting. So that'd be one advantage of writing, shipping quickly. The second is because it's digital, you just get quick feedback loops. Right? You're like, oh, you thought you had this great idea and it just didn't land, right? You could try it again one more time, or maybe just put it in the, in the idea graveyard, like, good idea, not worth it. So you get these really, really, really fast feedback loops. And then the third is that the things that do work, they just end up being drafts for the next updated version of the thing that you're going to write. So like there's so many posts that I've written like 3, 4, 5 times over a multi-year period. And what you see now is like the SEO worthy, high volume traffic, beautifully optimized, like blah, blah, blah. But really what it was like an email that like a few people wrote back. You're like, this is good. And then you paste the email into a blog post and like add 2 quotes to it and like format it a little bit better. And then like some people start sharing it on Twitter, and then you like blow it out into a 2,000 word piece, add some research, interview some more people. So like that's that creative process, but all in the while, there's that public accountability. There's a public feedback loops. You get the pulse of what people are thinking. People tell you, they're like, I love when you said that. I love the sentence in that. I love the analogy you used there. I love that metaphor, blah, blah, blah. You're like, okay. So I think that's the advantage. I discovered that quickly. I don't know how. And like, it's one of those things like the rule of thirds, like once you discover it, you can't unsee it. So like, I could never go back to just sitting in isolation, trying to crank out a 3,000 word essay. That's just, it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I guess I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for group conversation. So maybe I'll end on this question because it's I think somewhat related. But if you were kind of like rewinding the clock, 5, 6 years ago, you're going to go out on your own. You have a hunch it has to do with being a creator or producing content online. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious what advice you might give to people starting that journey today, and maybe some of the avoidable hurdles, if you will. Yeah, that you could advise someone turning today.
The avoidable hurdles, I would say, the mistakes that I constantly see people doing is like thinking that I see this like the first time writers is they spend 2 months writing a post and it's like 5,000 words and it's just like, and it's bad just by virtue of it being your first. And then they get so disheartened because no one like reads it. And then they like beg people to share it. Like I've just seen this so many times. So like, don't do that. I think the other thing is don't dilute yourself by trying to be on too many channels. So I learned very quickly that email was my best channel. Email/blogging. I think you could say they're kind of similar, but every time I tried to like get into Instagram or YouTube, it's just like you don't have the energy. Like be damn good at that one thing. Then once you've mastered that one thing, go to the next one. But if you're just like spraying and praying across mediums, you're just going to dilute yourself. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to lose touch of the feedback loops, right? Because these things are very precise. Like what works on YouTube does not work on Twitter, does not work in email, right? Like you need to really understand the texture of that. And you can't do that by being on 5 mediums at the same time. So those are some things that I would warn against. I know there was a second part to your question that I may have overlooked.
Oh no, that was spot on. It was like, what are the most tempting pitfalls? And one probably has more channels equals more, visibility.
Oh, you did ask what do I wish I had done differently? I think what you're doing, and Stu didn't tell me to say this, is I wish I had started working with editors earlier. Because I think that editors make your work so much better. And not only they make your work like better from just like a copywriting tightness perspective, but they take you out of the semi-myopic lens that like your very, very narrow worldview that you think everyone relates to. They'll quickly shatter that impression, especially a good editor.
Oh my God, that is the perfect point to end on, because if there's
I got one more.
Oh,
if you're gonna try to convert people, learn copywriting. Writing blog posts and copywriting are completely different skills. It helps to be good at one, to be good at the other, but they're completely different skills. Copywriting is a lot of psychology, much more than writing. And the minute that I really immersed myself in copywriting, my sales went through the roof, even though I was a good writer to begin with.
Totally. Yeah. It's like action outcome oriented writing. It is like very different approach. Okay. With 15 minutes on the clock, we will have a hard stop at the end of the hour here. We already have kind of a Q&A section blowing up. And Yina, if you're able to, you're welcome to unmute and kick us off. I know you had a couple questions. You're welcome to start wherever's best.
Oh yeah, sorry for spamming everyone. And thanks so much, Key and Stu, for hosting this. Key actually had a little bit, I don't know if hopefully this doesn't monopolize your time, but I came from a similar background in finance. And my question is really around managing fear. So I'm especially fearful of putting myself out there, especially on networks where I know I can increase my distribution, but networks where my former peers might see my work and kind of fearful of the judgment there. And I see that as a major block for me, and I can't seem to unblock that. And I was just wondering if you had any advice.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And it's going to sound quite cliche, but what's behind that fear? So again, I'll speak for myself, and maybe that can help you kind of disentangle it. So to me, there were a few fears. One was a fear of having made the wrong decision, right? And so by like leaning into this thing, which by definition I'm not going to be good at, was validation of a wrong decision. But again, whose decision and what's wrong in this case? Right? Like wrong is actually a very arbitrary thing, right? Like again, I believe that staying at BlackRock was the higher risk decision for me. And so proving people wrong or people viewing me as wrong or crazy, it really had to come from a place that like I had to like build myself up, not in the like I'm tougher than you, but it's like, why am I doing this? Like I am doing this because the things that matter to me are doing things that make me feel alive, being a role model to the kids, to my kids and my community, trying something different and seeing and sure, people are going to criticize that but that's just noise, right? Like the pillar, like I just like recenter, like, why am I doing this? And if you're doing it for the right reason, then it's much easier to stand than if you were doing it for the wrong reason, for like purely for money or purely to prove someone wrong. I'm not saying you're doing those things. Then the ground becomes much shakier. But I do think that there are these core fears at the root of a lot of this, which is why coaching has been so, like, not writing coaching, just like life coaching, therapy, which there's these core fears of like, who am I without my achievement? How am I deserving of love? And what makes me feel validated? Like these questions, they actually manifest in all of our careers. They're probably a little easier to shoehorn in finance because everyone's asking those questions. Then there's like a giant collective denial that like money will make all those problems go away. And we all kind of signed up for that devil's bargain with the devil. But so I would say just like going down into those layers of introspection with confidants, therapists, and coaches.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Great question.
So that's actually a perfect segue to the next question, which I'm just going to read out loud, which is what do you miss from your conventional career days?
Health insurance is probably the biggest one. I mean, health insurance is, because my wife is an artist, so health insurance in the US, if you are not employed by a company, is kind of, it sucks. It's difficult. But okay, what do I miss? I miss a little bit of like the water cooler talk. Like, did you see the AMAs? Did you see the VMAs? Like who's fantasy football, like blah, blah, blah. I miss like a little bit of that, but I'm able to get that through like other communities that I'm in. I think the thing that I miss the most, and this is not even about like my old job, but I miss like, like you're in a boat, like take rowing, it's like a shared movement towards a common goal. I miss that. Like, because if there's a goal, there's a vision that I have for RadReads, and I have contractors and virtual assistants and all that, but they just don't like bleed that passion the way I do. And I just wish that like people would be as excited so that I could be like, hey, I got this really cool thing. And they'd be like, yeah, I got this cool thing too. Like, let's put them together and make this like double cool thing. And I do have that with some of the peers and some of the community members. But I do miss, like, I do miss the like day in and day out being like, there's something bigger than us that we believe in and that we want to like push our collective energy forwards. But honestly, other than the health insurance and that, there's not much that I miss about it. It would be I would say that like I miss I don't miss the high income because like I didn't need that. I didn't want that money. But I there's a tiny part of me that misses like every 2 weeks, like money shows up in your bank account. And here, like it really is like eat what you kill. Like, you know, my income comes in like 1 week, 4 times a year. It's just like a hard way to live. But again, you also get used to it. And there's so many trade-offs. Like I cannot tell you like the freedom, the ability to surf, the ability to live by the beach, the ability, like I eat almost every meal with my kids. Like we go rock climbing on Tuesday afternoons. Like I still work a lot. I told you I work 35 hours a week. But we go, pre-COVID, we go rock climbing at 2:00 on a Tuesday because that was the day we went rock climbing, and work fit around that.
God, I love that answer. It's like, yeah, know what you're optimizing for on some level. I actually run into Yina, take another one of your questions around shipping drafts, and I'll just read it out loud. But I love your there seems to definitely be a theme in some of that advice, which is like ship early, ship often, just like get stuff out there, don't get hung up in your own head. So I'm curious, like when it comes to shipping drafts, do you kind of publish quickly, then go back and revise over time and flesh out anything that seems really promising? Or do you go through more of like a draft editorial process before you put maybe a blog post out there?
No, there's a lot of like follow the fun. I think, if you're going to write regularly, I cannot overemphasize how important it is to try to like tie what you're saying to the zeitgeist, like to the thing that people are talking about. I mean, that's something it took me a while to figure out. And again, it doesn't mean like you talk about the pandemic through like a quick hook on the Queen's Gambit, right? Like there's a way to do that cleverly as a good writer. But I really go with my intuition. I mean, I have the classic, like I have a list of, 100 posts or ideas that I could write. They're ranked by like, just like some like 1 to 5 star ranking. But honestly, I think I look at that thing once a quarter. I think if you're in the conversation, if you're just kind of like observing, I guess I'm telling you all, like, it just gets easier. Like your intuition becomes very, 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 very strong. You can almost smell the headline. You can taste the headline. You're like, this is going to work. This is a good opener. And like, it just kind of like, yeah, I'll take notes on a lot of this stuff, but honestly, like all of my notes for things that I'm going to write, I probably revisit like 2% of them. Which is why I don't spend a lot of time. I used to spend a lot of time taking notes. I just like write. Instead of taking notes, I'll just write a post. That will be my notes, right? And then I'll actually Google my old posts to like search my notes. So that would be, so no, there is no process. I think one thing that's also quite helpful is to give yourself time budgets, especially if you're going to ship quickly. I would say, like for my Saturday post, which is normally, 800 words, I don't let myself start it until Saturday morning. And so I wake up at 6 and I try to send it by 8. So I basically have 2 hours to send it. Or else like you just get in this like rigmarole of like editing and re-editing and retweaking, and like that's besides the point. I do use my analytics a lot. I go in and I really look at like what people are clicking into the newsletter. Again, I'm not like an analytics geek. I hate Google Analytics. I mean, I look at one number like traffic, but I don't do any of that shit. But I do look at what people click in email. I use that as like a very quick pulse. The other thing is I subscribe to probably like 50, 60 newsletters, and I skim them, but I really try to capture, I capture like the things that they care about and see if any, again, it's like really like finding the zeitgeist and really like if there's something that shows up in like 2 or 3 newsletters, like finding a way that I can kind of like insert one of my ideas into that. At the same time though, like I'm also working on longer pieces, right? I'll work on like a 3,000, 5,000 word SEO piece, but that's like a very, I don't even view that as writing. That's like a business asset to develop for other reasons.
I love it. And actually, Jen, if you've got your hand up, Jen, you're welcome to unmute.
Yeah. Hey Kay, I like kind of have been trying to do my annual reflection. Actually, Stu's holding me accountable right now to share that. And it's kind of like really getting personal as I'm like looking back on all the achievements I've had in 2020. And I actually challenged myself to ship for 100 days and I completed it. And I was so happy from shipping so much and it ended mid-December. And now like writing this annual reflection has been one of the longer essays I've written in a long time. And I feel like really weird that I haven't really shared it, but I also have this resistance to like share something that feels really personal. So I guess like my open-ended question to you is like tell me like how you made that transition more of like writing your newsletter, being behind the shield of curation, and then like making that transition to being like, I feel like this is TMI, but like I'm going to share it anyways because I think I'll be proud of my past self when I do that.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Jen. And I would say that I think the first layer I would start, and you have to be careful as you become a better writer, more seasoned writer, like you can share things through the lens of authenticity, but that are really like humble brags. And so like really being clear, like, am I sharing this truly because this is authentic and like this is a feeling that I want people to connect with? Or am I sharing this as like some weird way to make myself look good? I'm not saying you're doing that, but I found myself doing that often. The other thing, and then like as an aside, I would say like it's also okay to not share everything. I think that's something that I've come a long way. Like I've actually want to become a little bit more private with things that I share. Maybe that's why I want to highlight other writers more. And then the other thing that I would say, it's like the classic rule is like, don't read the comments. Like if the trolls, the Reddit, the tweet, like blocks, like when someone criticizes me, like I might skim it and I see it like, this is meant to be hurtful and not meant to be helpful. Like I delete it right away. Like I don't dwell on it. And so I guess like those would be a few ways, like know why you want to share it. It's okay to not share everything. And then, protect your mental health. I think one of the biggest advantages of having VA is that she, Tiago tweeted about this, but she protects like my mental health from, I don't get mean stuff, but I just get stuff people say like, you say too much, like work on that. And I'm just like, I don't need to see that. Right. So you see, I did it. But yeah, really protect yourself in that regards.
God, I'm amazing question. We could do a whole session on that. I'm going to stick us to our time here because I know we have a hard stop. So, okay, I guess I was going to ask you, what is the best place for people to find you, follow along, tweet stuff at you? Where should folks find you?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Stu. And like I said, if any of you want to just like, email me or DM me after, like I love these conversations. I love supporting like awesome people in these communities. So yeah, open invitation to reach out to me. But yeah, radreads.co is kind of the hub for everything. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll get kind of all the updates. I am building out the 10K Institute, which is this like focus on high leverage, high skilled work, which is basically like the learning platform. And that's just 10k.radreads.co. And on Twitter, Stu will put in it's Cameron, but you'll find me on Twitter. That's my most active social media.
Amazing. Well, Kay, I can't thank you enough for the hard-won wisdom, and there's already folks in the chat saying the same. And can't wait to maybe do a round 2 at some point because I just think like there's so much here to explore, and I just can't thank you enough for the generosity.
You guys are awesome. Keep at it. It's a fun, it's a deeply, deeply rewarding, not just financially, not financially, if it can be financially, but it's just such a rewarding experience to, see your ideas grow, see other people connect with them, refine your craft, and really like be a part of a global community. So I'm all for it. You guys got this. Just by being in this community means that you're taking it seriously. So only good things await you all.
Beautifully said. Well, awesome. Well, thanks again. And thanks everyone for joining. And I know the world is not seeking more Zoom calls, but this was definitely a special one. So thanks again, Khe, and thanks everyone.
Have a great rest of week.
Awesome. See y'all.
Bye.